Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of The View from the Top. And once again, we've got a fabulous edition for you. We've got some great guests. We've got some great insights. We're going to have, a lot of fun today. So do join us for this hour of talking mobility, talking about all the things, the issues that are facing us in these, well, pretty unusual days that we're all living through. We'll talk about the programs of the companies who are online and who are with us today, and I'll tell you a bit about that. And we'll be talking about the future as well. So welcome to The View from the Top. And what I would ask you to do, and many of you have taken part, this is I think our 20th edition now. Many of you have taken part in the show before, but so as you all know, join the conversation. Please write in the comments box. It's really important for us to know who is out there, to get the conversation going. One of the things that makes The View from the Top so special is the level of engagement we have between the panelists and the audience. And we do that through the polling research we do that through the discussions, we do that through the content, but above all, we do that through your engagement. So please, if you're out there, do let us know. Do say to us, the name of your company, who you're with, where you are, what it's like today. And if you've got questions as we go through the debate, please let us know about those questions. Please comment. We do try and deal with your comments as they come up live. So if you've got any burning questions, then do fire them through as soon as possible. So we're getting people coming through already, which is great. I can already see who's here. I can see Andreas is here. Good to see that. We're getting other people coming through, which is wonderful. But so we've got a fabulous show today, and let me tell you who our guests are. I'm delighted to say that we've got Alexandra Oeda and Molly McGregor who are going to be with us today, and they're from two pretty well-known companies. Alexandra is with Pearson, and Molly is with Publicis. So two major companies in a way, both in media, but one's sort of in educational publishing and the other is in advertising. But what's interesting is very, very different programs, and we'll get into that quite a bit, and very different focuses as we meet them. But before we do, I'll also tell you a bit about what we've got coming up over the next few weeks. We've got, well, first of all, actually, straight after today's show at 1:15, so we're going to finish on the hour, 1:15, we're doing a demo. So if you want to understand the Benevo platform, and we do get a lot of people asking us about the Benevo platform, then just go onto the Benevo website, and we're doing a demo for anybody who's interested in learning what exactly Benevo is. And then next week we're on a different subject. This week, obviously, we've got two in-house mobility professionals. Next week, we've got a leading expert, a real thought leader in our profession. And I'm delighted to say that next week, we're going to be talking culture, and with Dean Foster. Now, many of you will know Dean. He's one of the leading thought leaders, academics in our industry. And what Dean doesn't know about cross-cultural issues, intercultural issues, nobody knows. He's worked in, I think, over 100 countries. He's written countless books. He's been on countless TV programs. He's been on countless panels. And he really knows his stuff when we're talking about culture. And I think culture is very, very different these days, because we're talking about a new culture now. We've got a virtual culture coming in. We've got the work from home culture coming in. And the way that different cultures can adapt to that is a whole fascinating area. But if you want to hear about that, you've got to come back next week, and we'll be talking about it all next week. Let me just see who else is come through, and we've got absolutely loads and loads of people who are here. We've got let me just see who I can pull up. So we've got from Media PA, we've got from New Smyrna Beach. Hi there, Carolyn. We've got people coming from Portland, from tropical Pittsburgh. We've got from India, from London, from Houston. I won't go on with all of them, but we've got people from all over the world are coming, and that's just great that we've got so many of you. Before I pull up our guests onto the show, I do have a small favor to ask everybody, and that is this, is that our aim is to be the voice of the mobility industry, to get a real discussion going on all the issues that are out there. And what I'd like you to do, if I could be so bold, is when we post something for next week's edition about the view from the top, if you could share it or like it or comment on it, that just helps the LinkedIn algorithm. It helps us reach out to more people. So if you do enjoy the show, and if you could share it with your friends and colleagues, we would really appreciate that. So let me now bring on our guests, and let me just bring them on. First of all, I'm delighted to welcome to the studio. Where are you, Molly McGregor? Molly, how are you doing?
Hey, Brian, I'm doing great. How about you?
Yeah, I'm good. And whereabouts are you today?
I am right outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay, and working from home?
I am. So luckily, there was a big storm that came through last night, but I still have power.
Right. Okay. So you're okay for
Yep.
power. Well, thank gosh for that. I mean, so it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And we've also got Alexandra. How are you doing, Alexandra?
I'm good, thank you. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Where are you, Alexandra?
I'm in London in my flat. It's quite hot right now. Unusual for London, but it is.
Okay. And you're a bit of a expat in your blood, isn't it? Tell me a bit about your background.
Yeah, it is. I think it's almost like in my DNA, because I was born in London, raised in Switzerland by German, Japanese parents. And then from there, I moved to the UK, back to Switzerland, then to France, to Germany. And now I'm back in London after about 20 years or so. So been around, and definitely you learn a lot by doing that, especially if you're actually on your own. You appreciate what it means when you get support from others.
Wow, and it's great, and we'll get into a bit more about that as we go through the show. But it's great to have me. I'm looking at the comments coming through. One from my friend Yuki Watanabe from The Gap. She put, Brian, you always ask everyone else how they are. How about you, Yuki? I'm fine. Okay, Yuki, I'm really fine. Thanks for asking after me. I appreciate that. But all's good, and I'm here in a fairly hot London today. But thank you for asking. And Bindu commented about Alexandra. Said that's a truly multicultural background. So yeah, as you say, expats in your DNA. So let me just bring in our other guests. Julia.
Hi.
Where's Julia?
Hi.
There. How are you doing, Julia?
Fine, thanks. Yes.
Good. And great to have you on the show. And what are you going to be talking to us about today?
China, Europe, and the US.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's a lot to cover, and we'll get onto that in a minute. And then last of all, I want to bring in Michelle, who's been struggling for the last day or so. Michelle will tell us all about it. So, Michelle, how are you doing, Michelle? And I see you're in your car.
I'm in my car. As Molly mentioned, we had a storm roll up the east coast of the U.S., and we were not so lucky. We lost power about 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon. So I am coming to you live from my car where I have air conditioning and Wi-Fi, and I'm able to keep the phone on the charger. So this is View from the Top car edition.
Okay, so anybody out there who loves carpool karaoke? and I do. I mean, I think, Michelle, this is your chance. We just need you to burst into song, and you could be the biggest star of the mobility profession. You could be the James Corden of.
Yes.
That may not be a compliment. I'm not sure, but
I love it.
you could be the James Corden of mobility.
Well, like I said, the show must go on. So here I am.
Absolutely, and you are. I mean, you're a real trooper, and it's much appreciated. I know you've got no Wi-Fi in your house, and you've had storm damage in your area, and it's going to go on for days, I think, isn't it? They said it's up and running. Yeah. Anyway, so it's appreciated. But as I say, we've got to get the show cracking. And one segment of the show we do every week and everybody loves are the immigration updates. So what I'm going to do is, Molly, Michelle, and Alexandra, I'm just going to move you backstage for a minute. And Julia, if you could just start telling us a little bit about, what you're going to be talking about on what's been going on with immigration. So, Julia, whereabouts in the world do you want to start today?
China.
Okay, let's talk China.
Brilliant. Okay, so thanks to my partner, Becky Shear, who's based in Shanghai. And she's got some really, really important information for every global mobility professional who's trying to move people back to China. So the China travel ban is still in place, likely to be in place for a long time. We've talked about the lists of countries where the Chinese consulates are processing applications and where the Chinese government are issuing official invitation letters. And that list is growing, both for new visa applications and for those that need re-entry under existing permits. But the really, really important breaking news item is that now when you make any application from a Chinese consulate, you have to have a negative COVID-19 test. And that test has to be, the certificate has to be within 5 days of your travel to China. And not only do you have to have the test, but within that 5 days, it has to be notarized by the consulate. And what's happened is that the consulate are not familiar with this, and they're not quite sure about how they're notarizing. And what's happened is when this new requirement came out, people took the test first and got the certificate. Then they went to the consulate. Then the consulate didn't know how to notarize it. And then the validity of the test ran out because it was more than 5 days. And we've had a couple of cases where this has had absolutely disastrous consequences because the people who were actually the applicants were making it because they had leave in those countries and then that leave expired. So, we've had two really, really tense, difficult cases where people in a country, their leave has expired, they can't go to China. So the big top tip that Becky said is that when you're making these applications, find out first from the consulate, are they aware that it's got to be notarized? And do you know exactly how that's going to happen? Then do the test, then get it notarized, then you can go to China. So
good
I think
tip.
that's really,
yeah, many thanks for putting that one out there.
Yeah, so secondly, just moving on to Europe, again, thank you so much to Christine Sullivan, who's one of our key experts from Europe, but she has another top tip. And everyone in the UK is really aware of all of the problems that we've had with the government suddenly putting Spain on the quarantine list. A lot of people who were absolutely meant to be going back into the office, took a very precious last minute holiday to Spain. And when they got to Spain, they found that that Spain was on the list and then they couldn't.
Tell me about it. I'm meant to be going there next week.
You're right, because you can work from home. But if you do need to go into an office, obviously it's really, really difficult. Now, in Europe, we've talked about this all the way through these last 19 weeks about how unbelievably uncoordinated Europe is in this whole travel ban, COVID-19 situation compared to, for example, how they were so united on Brexit. So what happens in Europe on a practical level at the moment is that the Department of Health in each individual European country, they decide what countries are going to be on the quarantine list. And just as an example, in Belgium, at 4 o'clock every day in Belgium, they release a list and they say all the countries on this list are either red, orange, or green. Green is fine. Orange is we strongly recommend you quarantine, and red is you have to quarantine for 14 days. And what's happened, there's been all sorts of infighting because, for example, at one point, Belgium put Geneva on the list, the red list, and Switzerland was very offended by that. And then sometimes there's on the green list might be France, but then a region might be orange. And the real key point as a takeaway is that there's just no transparency. There's no coordination between the different departments of health. And what it means is that as a global mobility professional, you might think, oh, good, we can start like moving people around Europe, you know, especially Europeans. This is all great. But actually, you know, it's not great, because you could end up that they're having to quarantine. And so, you know, it's really, really important that you keep looking at those lists. The other point is that when we talked a few weeks ago about the EU travel ban, and we said like the EU travel ban is lifting, and the EU Commission was recommending 14 countries where it's saying, you know, I would recommend that you lift it for those. And then we discussed how uncoordinated the response was. And for example, we said the Netherlands said, yes, they would follow that in all 14, and other countries wouldn't. Well, the really important point is that, again, that's completely changing all the time. So the Netherlands has taken 2 countries off, which now it doesn't recognize. And Algeria has been taken off the main list of 14. So again, you must check that list. But ending on a really positive note, which is that we have explained that it's really good. There is an exemption to the travel ban in Europe, that you can come in for economic reasons. And that is being well respected by all European countries. So that's a very positive thing. And that's, you know, really helping a lot of companies now. So the other thing I just wanted to touch base on was the US. I spoke literally just before we went on air to Bo Cooper, who's head of government consultancy for Fragerman and based in Washington. And yesterday there was another executive order from President Trump. And a few people are saying that maybe it's not so important, but we feel that this is actually very important. And I could literally talk for the whole of the hour, but I don't think Brian would be very pleased with that. So I'm literally going to say 1 minute on it. But I think that next week, I am just going to say a few more words about the US, because there's an awful lot happening in the US. There's an awful lot more than seems that's happening. And I think one thing that would be quite interesting to talk about next week is what things might stick if President Trump goes and we have a Democratic government, what things that are happening now might stick and what might not. Anyway, so yesterday there was this executive order. It's seeking to restrict federal contractors' use of H-1B visas, and it orders agency heads in the US government to review the federal contract arrangements for any adverse effect on UK or US workers caused by government contractors or subcontractors using employees in the US on the temporary work visas or by offshoring that work. And it also directs agency heads to protect US workers from any adverse effects on wages or working conditions caused by the employment of H-1B visa holders. Now, some people, as I say, are saying, well, you know, this looks like, you know, just a straightforward review, but it is much deeper than that. I mean, the government's asking not only agency heads to review the contracts, and it's got to be by mid-September, but also to analyze the effect of US workers. And the other thing that Bo wanted to point out, which he said is, you know, of equal importance and is having sort of an interlocking effect, is that a memo was released on the same date, which basically is an agreement that USCIS will actually give the Department of Labor, if they find any information in the course of a petition or a site visit relating to breaches of non-compliance, they will give them that information. So, you know, there are many different things to say about this, but just the one key takeaway, I think, is that there's likely to be an increase in employer inspections and an issuance of policies or regulations so that it may be possible that H-1B employers and their clients might be jointly liable for compliance with H-1B program rules on wages or working conditions. But as I said, I'm going to say some more about the US next week, but I think that was really noteworthy to just bring up today.
Okay, thank you, Julia. That's really helpful. And yeah, let's make sure we catch up on the US. We need to have a really good session, I think, on the US. There's so much going on there. That's a promise to everybody out there that we'll do a bit more of a focus on the US next week. So thank you for that, Julia. Do stick around, and I'm going to bring in. Let me bring in Alexandra first. So let me just bring in Alexandra, and we'll move Julia backstage. Alexandra, so welcome again to The View from the Top. Tell me a bit about the company. Tell me a bit about Pearson.
Yes, Pearson is probably not too well known in Europe. It is quite a well-known brand in the US. And about 3 or 4 years ago, Pearson owned FT, the Financial Times, and then they sold it. And then just last year, they sold the last shareholders holding of Penguin Group. So at this stage, after like 3 to 4 year transformation within Pearson, we are really focusing on education, and it's great what has been developed in terms of apps and in terms of partnerships with various schools and universities. And maybe people don't know, like the Pearson English test is actually the acknowledged test for any migrants coming to the UK and having to pass a test. So that's just one piece of information which I didn't know until recently.
And it must be a very interesting time for your company with all the move to online learning that seems to be happening, caused by coronavirus. I mean, that must be, I suppose, there must be very, important ramifications for the way that you do your educational technology.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's challenging because it's happening so quickly. To get all the right apps and products in place is quite challenging. Okay, and let me bring Molly on screen too. Are you there, Molly?
Yes, hi there.
Hey, we got you on screen. So Molly, tell us a bit. You're with Publicis. Tell us a bit about them.
Yeah, absolutely. So Publicis is a company that is headquartered out of France. It has, I would agree with Alexandra. I don't know if we're as popular or if some of their companies or agencies that lie beneath the larger umbrella are more popular. Typically, I think if you were to hear about us, we're more known as a media company, but it's a lot more than that. We have several different solutions and hubs with 1,000 plus agencies underneath them. So it really varies from communication to health. Publicis Sapient, which is where my team originally came from and were acquired by Publicis, is more on the technology and consulting side. So a widely varied company with a lot of great stuff going on.
Okay, well, I mean, one of the things that I think people want to know is just get an idea about the program. So maybe again, start with you from there, Alexandra. Just tell us a bit about the mobility program at Pearson.
Yes, about 3 years ago, we were the size of 300 assignees, and now we're probably more towards between 50 and 100 because of obviously the company having really focused on one topic. But it's probably going to raise depending on the situation and how quickly we can get back to a normal mobility world.
And what sort of locations are they going to and from?
We have the majority US, UK, but we also have Australia. India is quite strong, and then pocket assignments within South Africa and Europe. And
how much was, did the moves completely stop, or have they sort of been going on at a trickle, or is there?
Well, they trickle. That's a good word. They trickle. Sometimes we don't even know that people are moving, and we hear, especially where the borders are not that strict, like US, Canada. We hear of all of a sudden that someone has moved, but the more difficult countries, like we have also assignees in Brazil and South Africa or India, where it's much stricter, they are all parked. They're waiting to be moved. So they work from home like everyone else.
Okay. And Molly, what about Publicis? What are your programs like?
Yeah, absolutely. So Publicis is about 85,000 employees. So in a normal sort of non-COVID year, we do about 2,500 to 3,000 relocations or assignments, a significant amount of business travel, and around 7,000 visa filings. So we are in 100 plus countries across the world. We have a large India program, a great team that supports it there. A lot of movement throughout EMEA, and similarly throughout the APAC region.
Okay, so your programs are pretty different, even though in some ways, in the broader sense, I suppose one could both say you're both media companies, but it's very, very different, your programs. And what about the sort of, the demographics of your programs? Maybe start with you, Molly. What's the demographics like? Are we talking about mainly sort of younger people or older? What's the gender balance? I mean, who are single with partners?
Yeah, I don't think it's, I wouldn't say it's anything consistent. It would largely depend on the agency and the type of work, but it's really normal for us to support a family with an international assignment or similarly a single individual. So it's really across the board. There's, like I said, a ton of variety throughout the various agencies, and our team essentially moves to support whatever the business needs in that particular arrangement.
So each agency can do its own thing in terms of the policy?
Well, no, we do have policies. We do. It's not, let's all move to the Bahamas. No. So we do have policies that support the move. I think what I wanted to underscore is that our team really tries to understand the different nuances, between, an agency that's primarily supporting the health industry, right? And you could see, like Julia was saying or has said on previous calls, there is a big need for that health work in the United States. So how do we support that versus maybe a media agency that has a lot of sort of younger talent. So maybe they don't have dependents. So I think, when we crafted the policies, we sort of took those individuals' agencies' needs into account.
Okay, but presumably you don't really know how many policies you have then if you've got all these agencies and all doing their own.
No, we have a short-term assignment, long-term assignment under the Publicis umbrella. And there are some other smaller ones, but largely that's where we're focused on.
Okay, so basically the center controls the types of policies and then the agencies will manage them.
Yes. Okay.
And what about Pearson? I appreciate it's a much smaller program, but I mean, what are your typical assignees, or I shouldn't be using the word assignee. I never know what the right word is, but person moving cross-border, whether they transferees, assignees, expatriates, nomad, whatever you want to call them. But what are your typical demographics?
Yeah, I mean, we have around 25,000 employees, just to compare to Publicis, and we have quite. We have all various generations. So we have the more senior level, we have the more junior level. We're quite big and strong on diversity inclusion. So we do not differentiate by gender or by married, single, etc. So we really look at the role and what role needs to be filled. And if that role cannot be filled locally, then it will be an assignment. And obviously, we all know, I think I'm not the only one, assignments are usually the most challenging one if you want to repatriate them. So the career planning is now in focus at Pearson as well. But over the years, we've seen more and more local to local contracts, so more the permanent moves. And the senior moves were more on the home approach, whereas the more junior moves or employees who raised their hands and said, "Oh, there's a job in India, I'd like to go there," and then usually it's very minimum support for them to relocate. But we focus on the core, like compliance, immigration, tax, and travel and medical, to make sure that is taken care of. But usually on allowances or any other relocation support, the business can decide how much they want to give. And we do have, as I say, we have the local to local, permanent local transfer policy, long-term, short-term, and now we're even going into more like virtual, what do we do, and more even more short-term than 6 to 12 months, even from like 2 weeks to 3 months policies.
Okay, I mean, you've got these policies, and one of the areas I want to get into is the whole question of how you manage. Actually, managing the policy is easy. The hard thing is managing the exceptions, I've always found. And I'd like to bring in, if she's still in her car, I've got a new nickname for her, the Cadillac Kid. Where are you? Oh no, she's gone.
No, I'm here.
There, you're still with us in your car. You're not driving.
What? No, I'm not driving, but I'll tell you, I faded out while I was backstage, so this is good timing. I'm here.
Okay, well, whilst we've still got you, I know you know, not only have you been coping with lack of internet and storms and tree damage and what have you, but you've also been doing some research. So do you want to tell us a bit about the poll that you've been doing, and maybe we'll get into the whole question of exception management?
Yep, of course. So one of the questions this week was, what are the majority of your assignment / relocations exceptions related to? And the choices we gave were shipment of household goods, housing allowance, class of airfare, or home leave. So those were the choices.
Yeah. So you carry on, Michelle.
Well, I was going to say, if we have Molly and Alex maybe comment about their programs, and then we can reveal the results and see, what our viewers have to say.
Yeah, so let's maybe start with you, Alexandra. How do you manage? Well, not how do you manage exceptions, but where are the exceptions when you see exceptions?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. When I joined last year, that was one of my questions to my predecessor, because there was just an exception coming through, and she was like, "Oh, we don't have exception, we don't do exception." And I said, "Really?" And I can't believe that. And when you do the year-end tax returns, etc., you find out there are exceptions, and it's very tricky. If it's not pushed through payroll and tax, then it's almost not discovered. You can't discover, and it's paid through expenses, and that's where we have the challenge. But any exceptions coming through, we have a process, and it has to be signed off by the very senior level, by the board member of that business.
So do you have some form of exception governance committee or something, or does it just go to the senior person? I mean, how do people get an exception through?
Well, I think it's depending on the situation. So if it's, for instance, housing allowance, you have to put a reason down why, and usually it's then you do a cost estimate and show the business how much it costs, and then there is no committee. It's within the reward function, and then we submit it to the HR and the equivalent executive management member, and then they make the call. They say yes or no.
Okay, and Molly, what do you do in terms of exceptions?
Yeah, I would echo Alex, and I would just say it's done carefully. I work with more in the immigration space, so as far as the specifics of it, I will say we have a very careful process. It's tracked, it's recorded, the people, the players involved, why the exception was requested, how much it costs, if there's any risk involved, and then who's requesting it. The program is large, so as I'm sure everyone on the phone understands, exceptions are difficult to manage. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's imperative for the business, and makes a ton of sense. So we're really careful, and I would say, Brian, just like you said, there's a strong governance structure that surrounds the process.
Okay, and Michelle, do you want to tell us what the answers were?
Yep. So number one answer was shipment of household goods at 53%. exceptions related to housing allowance of 35%, class of airfare 12%, and 0% of people actually said they didn't have exceptions around home leave, which I was a little bit surprised at. But yeah, that's
so the biggest category is household goods. That's the one which is normally the pain point. I mean, it's interesting the structures that companies put in. I mean, to me, the ultimate test of how well a mobility program is run is how well exceptions are managed. It's a bit like saying the test of a good strategy is knowing what's off strategy. The test of a good policy is knowing what's off policy.
And I don't know if I was going to say, Alex, I don't know if you remember this. Alex and I were at Honeywell together for a number of years, and we got to a point where we were managing exceptions. Either they were lifestyle or logistical exceptions. And I thought, that was a good way to put some parameters around how they're looked at.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, we're getting loads of questions coming in. We do in advance, we talk through the things we're going to discuss, but and some of the questions are coming in were things that actually we had down to discuss anyway. But let's be led by our audience. I'll just put this comment up there. Many thanks, Katie, for your comments. We appreciate that. But let's start with this question from Jeremy. Actually, we had quite a few questions from Jeremy. Attaboy, Jeremy, keep the questions coming. In fact, we had it down to talk about RFPs and RFIs anyway, but what do you think is going to happen to RFIs next year? And how do you think you're going to plan for the numbers when we're living in such times of uncertainty? So, I mean, are you, in terms of your own RFPs and RFIs, are you putting them on hold because things are so uncertain? Are you saying, no, we need to go through the normal process? And then what do you do when you go out for an RFP, you're issuing an RFP and, presumably you can't, the vendor will want to know roughly how big your program is. And, you're going to say, well, it could be this or it could be that. I mean, what are you doing with RFPs and RFIs at the moment?
We're continuing with them. At the end of the day, the business need has been there in the past. We understand that there will be, clearly a slowdown due to COVID, particularly in the immigration space, given that most of the borders have been shut largely since March. But we are continuing with them. What I think is helpful is everyone's in this environment. So the vendors do understand that when we give past numbers, the past numbers were based on a world that we no longer exist in. So when we've been engaging with the vendors, they've been, understanding of the metrics that we've provided to provide the scope for the RFI.
And I would agree with Molly. We are continuing with RFIs as well, RFPs, and for probably a bit trickier on the relocation side, but on the compliance like immigration and tax, that actually will get more complex and more complicated, where we need the experts in the field, especially from a global perspective. And on the relocation side, yes, that will be a challenge, but we have past figures and hopefully we will get back to where, more or less not normal, but people will continue to move. I think it's a different service people will have to look at rather than the straightforward services. I can just think of, virtual assignments rather than, virtual home search rather than having to come in person, etc., to, alleviate the cost pressure, and then focusing on the support of the actual provider. I think that will be more of a focus. Yeah, absolutely. We're getting so many questions coming in. Here's one actually on a subject we haven't really talked about very much. And from Mark O'Reilly, have your mobility policies been updated recently, or indeed a while ago, to ensure they're in line with your organization's diversity and inclusivity initiatives? Is that, Molly, you're nodding. I mean, can you sort of talk us through what's happening in your case?
Yeah, no. So I really like the question, Mark. Over the past couple of months, Publicis, like many organizations, has made a strong focus on on D&I, particularly given the Black Lives Matter movement that's prevalent in the United States and across the globe. So we haven't, we're large, so we're a little bit quick to turn. So we haven't necessarily updated the policies, but I have been in discussions with my colleagues of how we're remaining aware and ensuring that our policies support and are aligned with our D&I initiatives. So like Alex was saying, are we making sure that we're giving equal consideration to single individuals versus individuals with a family? So, you know, it has been in our discussions, and I do anticipate that we will be making changes.
Yeah, same at Pearson. D&I is high on the agenda, and we are looking at, as I mentioned, the positions or roles, if it's assignment or local to local transfer, is very much based on what's in the country, and HR and really senior management are looking at opening up and making sure there's no discrimination for any gender or any race, you know, racism or anything. So that is going to impact, obviously, us, whether we have to make a specific paragraph in the policy or not. But I think it's going to be driven on the HR talent acquisition and recruiting level.
It is such a difficult area because, you know, we look at it on one hand, it's actually very simple to be, you know, we are diverse, we are inclusive, end of story. But there's also countries out there where they don't necessarily share that value system, and it can then be difficult and indeed dangerous sometimes. And, you know, I think somebody asked a question about duty of care, but there's also a duty of care in here as well, in terms of, you know, who you send where and what the implications could be for them or their family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah, I would agree. I think duty of care is something we've seen come more into our scope since COVID. Right when the COVID pandemic began, Publicis, which I thought was, you know, a really strong move in support of our employees, offered to send everyone home, everyone that was on an assignment. And it was a true effort. Something I have never seen before. They were exploring all options. You know, people were talking about flights and chartering flights. I don't know if we did that, but you know, certainly all the effort and due diligence was there to make sure that our employees were first and foremost, you know, given outside the health concerns, like the mental health concerns and the stress that was on our employees. And our team, I could see, sort of began to partner with HR, with the Publicis sort of group level on, you know, what is our role in duty of care, and how do we support the larger organization as they carry forward with this really important mission.
Yeah. And another comment that's coming in from this is from Henri. We talked about exceptions. Do you see the pandemic as one huge exception, or is it a changing factor? I mean, is this a short-term thing, or is this going to change everything forever? And if you know the answer, please tell everybody.
If I had the crystal ball, that would be great. I think as Molly said, based on duty of care, there has been more flexibility and allowing exceptions, especially if you have health and family issue and mental or health issues involved. Going forward, whether that will be the case depends really on the situation, because there are different scenarios, countries opening up, travel ban being lifted, individuals maybe by choice going rather than being sent. So there are very different scenarios we have to probably take into consideration and evaluate before we actually say yes or no. As usually in global mobility, it always says it depends. It's never yes, black, yes, and white, no.
I'd like to move on to a sort of related subject. We talked a little bit about going out to RFIs. The question was asked by somebody, and it's actually something we've done a bit of research on. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about how you manage service providers. And let me ask this question delicately, because I know there's a lot of service providers out in LinkedIn watching us. The question I'd like to ask you both is, what makes a good service provider, and what really sort of irritates you with a service provider? So I mean, what is it about a service provider that is, you go and say, yeah, we've got a really great, I know you can say the word partnership, but beyond that, if we drill down, what is it that really makes a good relationship with a vendor, with a service provider, and what is it that actually causes a bit of a problem?
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, you go for it, Alexandra.
I think a good vendor is if it can be seen as an extended arm of the global mobility team. So it's not you and us, it's actually we. That's I think is a big start, because then there is no kind of hick hacking between HR and global mobility and the vendors. And I think that is a very important and critical foundation to start with. And the other important part for me is that you actually probably comes in with the first, but really working together and communicating and not being blindsided by what's going on with one service and the other service, and especially from a global suppliers or providers. Some of them are stronger in one country than the others, and they're that's for me a make and break, that if they are disjointed, then we're not seen as an extended arm. We don't have the kind of collaboration and communication, of transparent communication. Yeah. I think for me that's important.
Yeah, I get that, and I suppose sitting as a corporate, I think my line to any service provider would be, it's not my job to manage your network. The service provider's got to be able to manage their own network. And I suspect, in my experience, there's nothing more frustrating than seeing a situation where you're effectively having to join the dots in a vendor's organization because they're not communicating.
Yeah.
Molly, what's your experience in there?
Yeah, I would agree with Alex. I think that the primary linchpin is building a relationship with that vendor so that they truly understand the nature of the organization, almost as deep into it as how our contracts work, what important lines of business are coming up, where we'll need people to move to. Just as an example, one of our vendors, we look to them to manage, and this is the immigration space, but we look to them to know our policy on, let's say, premium processing visas. And so we, as Alex has said, we expect them to be the first line of our team of, no, we don't premium process this visa unless, and you have this person's approval and I don't see it attached. So, we're able to, to leverage them to take some of the burden off our team because, we're a little bit, smaller, and that's one of the reasons we do outsource. And I think that, once you're able to have them integrated at that level so they understand why you're going to escalate because this contract is very significant to the business, or they already have their ATM on it because, the contract is significant. I think, that works well to establish a good relationship.
Okay, let me bring Michelle back in. Is she still with us? Yeah, we still got you. The car battery is still running. I hope you got AC in your car. So one of the things, we're talking about managing service providers, and one of the questions that I know you've been looking at, Michelle, is this whole question about when you go out to an RFP, how do you determine who the winner is? So I don't know if you want to talk to us about the research you've been doing.
Yeah. So, I think there's a lot of factors that go into RFPs. Usually a lot of stakeholders, mobility, sometimes procurement has a say, and maybe some other HR leaders. So we asked the question, what is the reality of the determining factor when deciding who wins the RFP? Is it price? Is it team chemistry? Is it technical strength / ability? or is it the reputation and relationships?
I mean, I think that's fascinating. I mean, I think, many people think when you've got procurement involved, price is going to be right up there, especially as, and I think it's quite sad, but I think our industry, has become quite commoditized over the last, well, God knows how many years, 20 years or so. It's become more and more commoditized. But is that really the case? I mean, when you actually go to making a decision, and you guys, Alexandra and Molly, you're making decisions as to who wins an RFP, and you have been in the past. I'm sure you will be again in the future. What in reality is the single determining factor when you decide between service provider A and service provider B?
I think for me, it's a combination of probably all four of them. I mean, as you said, Brian, price, that's the key thing for procurement, but then procurement just looks at the figure. They don't really know what's behind. And, in terms of processes, etc. What I think going forward for me is probably key will be technical strength and ability, to use technology for lots of various reasons. And then, the relationship, as it's one of the foundation that probably will build throughout the time when you work together, because you can only really get to know each other when you're working together. Okay,
and Molly, what's your view?
Yeah, so I'm actually reading the comments too, and I agree with Robert.
I'll pull that one up actually. So this is from Rob Lesser. You should have a weighted scoring system designed before you ask for proposals. Questions should be designed to elicit scoreable responses. Great comment, Rob.
Yeah, so that's what we do. So all of the, when you ask for one determining factor, it's a combination of them all. We have all of these, all of the choices that Michelle has provided, right? We have them in a weighted scorecard, but that's exactly what it is. It's weighted and they're all on there. So depending on the region, it might vary. So for example, with Brexit happening in EMEA, right? Like we are very highly attuned to whether a certain vendor is able to provide a relationship with the UK government, whether they have had experience with filings of our volume. So I would say technical strength would be huge there, maybe weighted a little bit more. In another region that's less complicated, maybe price is a little bit scored a little bit higher. So, I think Robert hit it right on the head. That's how we do it. And then we appropriately drive the questions to match the scoring answers.
Okay, so you do what I'm going to call the lesser approach now.
Yes, exactly.
Your famous Rob is that you design, the first thing you do is you design your scoring matrix, then you do the questions. Exactly. And I suspect that's not what most people do. I expect most people design the questions first, and there's an afterthought a couple of days before the actual the RFP meeting. They think, oh my God, we've got to score these things now, and they start putting together a scoring matrix. Or maybe even somebody in procurement comes in and says, well, here's the scoring matrix. Other comments that are coming in, I saw this from Jeremy Chandler. Reduce RFIs to 15 key questions. Everything else can be found online. Nazia said technical strength is the key determining factor. And in fact, similar comment from her, has cost become the biggest factor in choosing the service provider? In that case, how will it affect quality? Rob put thanks, I think. No, the lesser Robert, I think, is that absolutely fine. So anyway, let's go back. What did Michelle tell us? What did the audience say when we polled them?
It was fairly even. Leading the results, 32% was reputation. 28% was technical strength / ability, 28% price, and 12% said team chemistry and likability.
Okay, let me put my 2 cents in here, because I've got some some views on this, which you're free to disagree with, but they're my view. I'm not that convinced that technical ability is the determining factor. And I'll tell you why I say that, is that I think that when you get down to your shortlist, all the people can do the work. If they couldn't do the work, they wouldn't be in business. In my background, I was a partner at EY and before that at Anderson on the tax side, the human capital side, tax and immigration. And my managing partner at the time said to us that we were talking about the big four firms. He described us as, quote unquote, various shades of beige. And what he meant is actually, the firms, if you look at them from the outside perspective, are actually fairly similar. If you look at, say, let's take the tax firm, PwC, KPMG, EY, Deloitte, what actually really is the difference to them? They can all do tax returns. They can all do immigration. I think that's the same, with some of the RMCs, some of the household goods companies. They can all do the basic goods. Can they ship your goods from, New York to Tokyo? Yeah, they can all do that. If they couldn't do that, they're out of business. So I don't think they would actually get through even the first stage of the process. I'm also not convinced that price is a determining factor, because certainly when I've seen it, what I tend to see is that the client or the procurement person works out who they want and then go back to the poor service provider and tells them to sharpen their pencil. So as long as you're not completely out of whack, if you're in the ballpark, if you're the firm they want, then yes, price is always an issue, but somehow it gets resolved because people end up being, told to go down and, as I said, sharpen their pencil. That leads me to chemistry and relationships. And I think they are hugely important, because you've got to get on with the team, assuming that everybody is competent. And I think it can be one or the other, but the one I've always found seems to work the best is prior relationships, prior reputation. If others in your organization really have got a strong relationship, say, the CFO or the CEO has got a really strong relationship with one firm, it's pretty hard for another firm to get in the door. I'm not saying you don't have to be competent. What I'm just saying is competence is a given. And beyond that, it's all about relationships. And I used to have a sort of a mantra when I was with one of the firms that said I wouldn't bother responding to an RFP if I didn't know it was coming. Because if I didn't know it was coming, then it meant I didn't have a very good relationship with them to know. But and I was just there to be in with the numbers. But hey ho, that's just my views on all that.
No, I agree with you, Brian, but it also depends on the relationship throughout a contract before you go into an RFP. If that's been wonderful, then it's very difficult to change. But if that has had some up and downs, then obviously it's a different picture.
Yeah, we're getting towards the end of our hour, but we did have one other audience poll that Michelle, I don't know if you want to just sort of touch on in our dying minutes. We might run over a couple of minutes. But.
Sure. Going back to talking about vendors and the relationships, we asked a question: how often do you conduct business reviews with your clients/vendor partners? So the choices were: do you meet with them annually, semi-annually, quarterly, or only upon request? Molly, Alex, do you guys want to comment before I announce?
Yeah, I would tend to probably say quarterly, but at the minimum semi-annually. Yeah. Because you keep forgetting things, so you have to keep track, etc. So it's better to have them more frequently. And then you can measure their KPIs as well. You see this changes from one quarter to the next quarter, or 6 months to the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree, quarterly, semi-annually. And then in the event of a large occurrence, and this is, again, I'm speaking largely to immigration, but, Brexit, something significant where we'd want them immediately in, or something a little more sudden, like the executive order that Julia was mentioning at the beginning of the call. If that really affected our business, we'd want their sort of immediate guidance, and we'd likely want them in front of our more senior business leaders, just so we could begin to get a handle on the effect of the law.
Okay, and shall we share the results then, Michelle?
Yep. Yeah, the overwhelming folks agreed quarterly, 59%. Annually was at 19%. Semi-annually was also 19%, and just 4% said upon request. So, seems quarterly would be a best practice, and I would agree with that myself.
Okay, so I think we've gone into some pretty interesting areas today. We could have gone on for a long, long time. There's so much there. Let me just bring Julia back. Julia, and the stuff you were saying about the US and the executive order, there's so much in there. As you said, we will come back to that next week. So that was really good. I hope everyone's enjoyed the show. We are pretty much out of time. I'd like to thank everybody who's been listening in. We're back again next week with Dean Foster talking about culture. And if anybody's interested in a demo of the Beneva platform, we're going live with one on the Beneva website in about 10 minutes time. You can find it there. But all that really remains is for me to thank our guests, to Alexandra and to Molly. It's been a pleasure having on the show. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed having you here. So many thanks. And of course, the regulars, to Michelle and Julia, many thanks. See you next week. And to Michelle in particular, the carpool kid has been, you are famous for this.
Hopefully I'm not sitting
above and beyond.
Hopefully I'm not sitting here next week.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully you got internet by next week. So anyway, for everybody, goodbye and see you all next week.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.